And actually, a little bit about this video, at least a little that I know of, is that the Muslim Public Affairs Council was the first outreach that BuzzFeed reached out to you know, do you have any Muslims that we can put in on this video? And so for me, what was concerning at that point was such a great or such a national organization as it likes to be claimed is making judgment calls on participating in campaigns like this without necessarily connecting or communicating to the communities that are actually engaging in, you know, in or with religion itself. And so that's why I think I bring it back to my point of, is it now we are just merely responding to the secular or not even responding anymore, but just jumping on that bandwagon? Because if we watch this, and we can probably all, you know, have our own reflections on it, this video has almost nothing to connect.
Put them in the same video.
Yeah. But I think the problem is that this is talking on the level of identity politics. It's not talking on the level of...
But how can you not stand for anything?
That's the point. I think, to me personally, I didn't have to say that.
Right.
I think that when everything kind of gets dissolved into identity politics discussions, which to me in the last 6 or 7 years, that's all I see and all I hear about.
Yeah.
Then you can't really talk that much about justice. You can't really talk that much about anything that anybody wants, a moral value. It's just, well, this is my space, and please don't encroach on my space, right? But the weird thing is that so much of the identity politics discourse is operative in social justice organizations. So there's some cognitive dissonance going on.
Totally.
I think
because one justice is not the same as the other justice. I mean, maybe sometimes they are, but we need to have a conversation about that.
A sad thing is also that, at least from what I've seen, the real actors in the identity politics conversation are people of privilege who have, highly educated white liberals. I mean, I'm not saying that it's only limited to them and their discussions, because now it's everybody talking about it. But it's interesting to me that they are sort of the leaders of this, this cultural phenomenon, this movement of sorts. And, it's ironic. It's ironic because they've infiltrated minority social justice circles in the guise of empowering minorities, but really they are steering these conversations because you didn't see this kind of focus on identity politics versus the social justice issue itself in minority circles until the last 10 years or so.
It's trickle-down politics.
But the other thing that's very interesting is perception. You all don't see yourselves as Americans who are representative of far larger majorities. There's this minority conversation that is inside of a minority population in the world. Do you know what I'm saying? There's a difference in seating. You're not minorities, because we're in global spaces.
Right.
You are representatives of some of those global spaces who are Americans. The thing between that space and your particular nationality as belonging to a much larger space than is the entire population of this place. So you somehow or the other not got to let that majority-minority, which is very much superficial and fabricated here, control your conversations and your thoughts about what you can do.
This issue of where do you see yourself seated? Meaning, this actually came up in the radio program when he talked about how religion has given new creative ideas for engaging with big questions that secularism or secular progressivism or whatever doesn't have the discourse to deal with. What he says is that a lot of people have begun turning to religion because it has a whole, millennia of discourse and ideas and symbols for dealing with problems, right? And what he said was that religion, instead of localizing you, actually can universalize your horizon, your moral horizon. And it kind of relates to what Doctor, you mentioned, because we might see ourselves connected to a global community, but the problem is, and I think this, again, is a fundamental problem for Muslims here, is we're still trying to decide what we are as quote-unquote American Muslims. Right. Because we often...
that's a location.
But we often identify ourselves vis-a-vis over and against, actually, Muslims here, there, outside of our...
No, but you can do both simultaneously. Mm-hmm. You know, when the American travels abroad, they bring that American consciousness to wherever it is. And that's from a sense up here of where I am in the space. You know, and I'm not, you know, you are who you are nationally and locally and where you got born and all of that. That has nothing to do with bringing bits and pieces and portions of either an Islamic consciousness or, you know, some world-centeredness to the space. I don't think. I mean, I could be wrong.
Yeah.
But when I travel overseas, the things I complain about are things that I'm not inconvenienced by here.
Right.
You know, but everybody knows that's an American you're talking to. You know? And I'm not saying that we separate into our other ancestral identities, but the globalness, the consciousness that comes along with being a global citizen, even though it's one that Americans are other Americans are going to push back against because of their parochialism.
Mm-hmm. So I sit and think a lot about like what does self-determination mean in all of this, tying it in with agenda setting and this balance of prioritizing talking points on the agenda and where we stand and what we're trying to organize around, and developing a stance of saying, yeah, obviously you ain't supposed to be homophobic. All right, cool, next, right? And I think that it was brought up in the podcast regarding the intra-religious and inter-religious domination. Domination. And so I'm thinking now in this context of like self-determination, I just think of it in the sense of like, just me being African American, what's my relationship to Africa, and then in this context of Islam as well, and in the context of the Americas, like how I'm black, I got Latino friends, intentionally trying to figure out Spanish to converse more efficiently with people, and now you're in these conversations and circles oftentimes where it's like black-brown solidarity, and it's like it can come off as phony sometimes, or it's preachy to the choir, or I don't feel comfortable in it, even though they call it such an intentional safe space, because I haven't negotiated what they're talking about, and I have sound rationale behind it if somebody's trying to challenge me, and I'm just comfortable with it in like a religious framework, like with the text and all that stuff, and just the application of life. But self-determination for me, I see it more along the lines of like, what is our agenda tying in like a public good? And it shouldn't have to be like, are we going to be mad, like formulaic about it? Like we need certain amount of people to get into politics. We need certain amount of people to be these cultural leaders. So at least we should start talking more about strategy and demographics and the strengths that we have. Because one of the premises of organizing is like the world as it is and the world as it should be. I see it similar to like dunya and akhirah. And like what's popping off right now is like there's a lot of good already in the world. And depending on your religious paradigm, such an overused word, but how you really settle with your religious identity, where we can offer some different talking points in this identity politics, or collectively we can say, we're not even going to talk in these identity politics arenas right now. Let's seriously figure out some things on intra-religious so that we can then not necessarily operate as one, but show face as one. Because Bill Maher getting up talking about oversimplifications like Sunni Shia is something. Like, he waters down religion just to conflict inherently. And Rajiv was making it seem like rarely was it like let me get it right. Where it was like inter-religious domination, where it's just Muslims versus Hindus. Like, the concept of being a Hindu is some colonial stuff. You know what I'm saying? Like, he was just like,
Can you explain that?
To my the Hindu part. So to my understanding, it seemed like the construction of Hinduism was fabricated during the British Empire. Maybe it's a divide and conquer piece. I don't want to speak affirmatively on it. I don't get it. But the cats that I've spoken with that are South Asian, I didn't know this. Erase all these boundaries. It's 50-50 if we're going to look at it on like numbers piece, right? Bangladesh, formerly East Pakistan or whatever it was, and what else is other? Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and the subcontinent of India. How much of that was this division of Hinduism versus Muslim ultimately leading into the partition and the creation of Pakistan was to reassert geopolitical strife, and Britain still maintains that hand of whether it's control over institutions, the intellectual thought that's there, the leaders that are propped up there. Back to what I was saying about self-determination in this numbers piece, I just find it interesting, like, India's democratic system is like one voice, one person, right? Why would you need to have this, then, face of religion to steer how you vote or steer where you align yourself with or give you these parameters in which for you to operate? I just think self-determination allows for us to have some conversations internally so that in this game of like this poker face that you have to show to the world, where do we really sit for the benefit of us and ultimately this public good piece? So I think of a lot of these conversations here and young people, to be honest.
The work thing. But going off what he said, like self-determination and like long-term goals and like agenda, I think that goes back to like your community and what you're involved with and like what your community's agenda is, you know, because I mean certain areas and certain communities might be, okay, you know, let's focus on ourselves and build ourselves up, and then other people might be involved in politics. I think it depends on it really. I think it's really community based, and you know what your like what self-determination is to the community and like your long-term goals.
And the problem is like a lot of our local communities maybe don't even have a vision.
Everybody has different goals.
I think one example, jumping off of both of your points, comes to mind is I think that a lot of times in different like sub-communities of the larger Muslim community, there's a community need that's out there. Whether it be, the example that comes to my mind is like with Muslim women empowerment and, you know, Muslim women rights and this idea of, you know, whether it's like actual rights, whether it's about, you know, like women taking hold or criticizing sort of patriarchal systems and things like that, which is happening a lot with young Muslim women that I've seen, my peers or people younger than I am. And the thing is that those communities, a lot of times, in our community, we don't have that space where we sit down and talk about these issues or raise these issues. And so what often happens is that the need is there and the need's not going away. So a lot of young Muslim women are looking to resources outside of their Muslim community, mostly governed by, again, these people outside of, you know, whether it's non-Muslims, whether it's people like who are non-religious at all, or have have an aversion to religion almost. So these are the people and the leaders and the influencers that are sort of mentoring young Muslim women. This is one example. And what happens is that their complete religious grounding is turned over, or sometimes fades away, or, if someone is empowering you and saying, hey, you're worth something, I care about your opinion, that's very appealing to a young person. And if that person who's saying that has not respect, but has no sort of, they don't believe that your religious grounding is legitimate to begin with. Mm-hmm. What is the end result going to take shape? Like, what is it going to look like? Mm-hmm. And I think that's a huge problem. And that Muslim woman thing is one example, but I see it a lot. Mm-hmm. And
that was like the whole thing with Femen, and that one Algerian, I think it was an Algerian girl, who falls into Femen and then does what she does and then gets in trouble. And yeah,
and it actually,
level, really.
The other outcome of it that I've seen also is when you're part of that Muslim community and you're sort of you get your need fulfilled elsewhere, you also do a disservice to others who are not like you, which is the majority of Muslims. Mm-hmm. Meaning, like this video is a perfect example. When they say, I'm Muslim but I'm not homophobic, I'm Muslim but I'm not, but I date, or whatever it is, you're setting up everyone else in the Muslim community who are those things, or who believe in those things, or have religious grounding for believing, so whatever, as the enemy, as the other, as, I'm the good one, you guys are the bad ones. So that kind of thing is happening all over the place.
And the Muslims who do that, they are the good. They are the good one. Because even that formulation of good, that's always existed. There have always been the good. What is that? The model minority. That's always been there.
Say that again?
What Lena was saying about this video kind of setting up two groups of people. The people who are in the video, I'm Muslim but I date and whatever. These are the good Muslims, because that formulation of good has always existed with any minority group or any group altogether. There's been the good ones, which essentially means they're accepted by the majority. In our current situation, which just means what is normal. In our current situation, this just means you're accepted by you've become knighted by whiteness, right? Like Indians used to be white. Until one day they just realized, oh man, we don't like these guys as much as we thought we did, so they just kind of took the crown away, no, you guys aren't white anymore. But white can be just a synonym for good. Italians are now somehow white, but they were not before at all. Irish is the same thing. So it really has nothing to do with color. But again, for them, it's hey, let's make a play and get back into the running, and let's get the crown again and be the good ones. That's kind of what this is. So what it does is it makes the other ones the bad ones. So this is a classic kind of power play apology thing that's every group in history has done. So this is just how it looks when Muslims do it, and that's why it's abhorrent to us. That's why we're ew. Because, wait a minute. Because they're kind of talking about us, and they're kind of putting us into groups. That's why we're so, ew about this. But then again, look at the views on this video. There's a reason for that. So,
imagine the flip side. So imagine I'm Muslim and I pray.
Yeah.
Right? All the Muslims who don't pray would say, well, I'm Muslim too, right? I'm Muslim, but I pray would not be allowed. But I bet you can have one that says, I'm Muslim and I don't pray.
Yeah.
Because all those who pray can be otherized. In our social context, that's okay. It's okay to otherize the religious. But if you were to say, we have a portion of our community that is not as quote-unquote devout, whatever that means, or that doesn't do the rituals, whatever that means, you can't otherize them in our society. That would be called bigoted.
Yeah, exactly.
But to otherize a more devout person is not a form of bigotry.